We are still with the DA leader, Mmusi Maimane, who's my guest, and we have asked him a few questions. We will be asking a few more, but we asked you to participate in our conversation, and we got this message from Koketso, and let's hear from Koketso. What's your question?
I'm Koketso Dlongolo from Davidton, and my question is: how does the DA think it can transform South Africa when members of its own leadership do not understand or recognize white privilege?
I don't think people don't recognize it. I think racial inequality is something that is a shared understanding across the organization. Our transformation of society is about saying, let's break down ways, especially around the economy, where there's concentration, break it down to city level so that there's much better inclusion. There's much more micro-enterprise that can come on board. We can allow small businesses to thrive and be increased. Let's remove the red tape of the issue. Let's allow for South Africans who are excluded, particularly in rural economic development, be allowed to come into a formal structure of the economy. And the other crucial issue is transforming society is an economic question, but it's also an educational question. How do we ensure that there is a labor regime that is developed? And for us, we've adopted a whole policy that looks at how do we go from the cradle to the career. And that's about early childhood development centers. You know, our kids, but 78% of our kids, once they get to grade 4, can't comprehend what they are reading. That's a challenge. Once we get to matric, our kids drop out. And so what we are saying is, let's develop early childhood development centers. Let's ensure that in primary school we have collaboration schools where private education can be provided, private-public education can be provided to kids. And then once kids leave school, let's give them a year upon which they can have an internship program, along with an economic development that's city-led. So that small businesses, micro-enterprise can thrive. So we look at a whole holistic picture about turning society. And then socially, how do we ensure that we keep ensuring that it's one South Africa for all, where black and white can work together? That's part of our transformation about us as human beings, but the dignity of us as people.
And I understand and appreciate that that's on the part of the policies and the public sector, what it can do. In as far as the private sector itself is concerned, what do you think it should be doing? Something that is immediate, you know, so-called low-hanging fruit that should be done but is not being done, because with all our problems in South Africa, money is not really the problem, but we live with this long-standing high unemployment rate of around 30%. Surely, and there are people who are there looking for jobs as we speak. They're waiting for something. They would like to hear that this is what can be done in 6 to 12 months, at least, that can help kickstart job creation.
One more than anything, if we deal with the Labor Relations Act, the private sector is a fundamental job driver. What we should be doing now is saying, hire so many people, we'll put up a certain level of incentive to ensure that we do that, and we can guarantee that. Because anybody who should be a hero in this country is anyone who employs people, creates work. That's the first starting point. The second issue is, let us set up a Jobs and Justice Fund, which is something I've been fighting for, so that we take private sector and say, as a form of redress, you contribute to this fund. Because what that fund will do is that it will help fund micro-enterprise, small businesses. Someone who is starting a business in Sandton has already got social capital. Someone who's starting a business in Soweto may have a great idea, but they just simply don't have the capital for it. Let's help them with this venture capital fund. It's the same in all sectors, mining, all other industries. But then, thirdly, how do we ensure that we break down the brass cap of the economy, where big business trades with other big businesses in the value chain? I'm saying break that down. Let's allow micro enterprises to come and participate, so that we can say, rather than us procuring services just from the same established industry, we're going to diversify and ask for more micro enterprise to come on board. In the 12-month period, we can really reset, create the right reforms, the right culture, so that we not only increase employment, but we diversify where our economy sits.
All right, let's take another question.
I'm Musi Tutoya from Lenasia. So the EFF has well substantiated the expropriation of land without compensation. I'm just quite unclear as to what the DA's policies that have been or will be put in place within the same subject of land reclaiming, so to speak.
Look, the DA supports land reform, land restitution. As I said earlier, our job is to get title to individuals. Let's make sure South African citizens can own title in that way. Let's ensure that those who work the land become part owners of that land or owners of that land. Or let's ensure that ultimately in the expropriation without compensation is not really the solution, because compensation is not the inhibitor. We can really go and expropriate and ensure that in fact we transfer land to people, and so within the constitutional framework. And therefore for us what we're saying is, let us put it to the constitutional test. Let government take out 4,000 farms that they already own. Let's make sure South Africans can own it so that we can advance the development of it. So from where the DA sits, we are simply saying, let each home, let each family, let South Africans own title in their right. Because when we do that, we can create economic prosperity.
But then there's a view, again, in South Africa that the economic makeup of our society, right, and the dominance or otherwise of the white community on the economy, and the fact that the black community is underprivileged, is precisely because of the relationship, the land relations, the fact that the 70% or substantial portion of South Africa's land space is owned by whites, and it is as a consequence of conquest of the black people. And I think that's why it resonates with a lot of people, this argument that just take land wherever you find it, and give, or people should occupy it, or let the state own it and then give it to whoever it wants to give it to.
That land is disproportionately owned is not debatable. But how do we get there? I think we must do a thorough analysis of where the land sits and what happens to it. Private property ownership is something that helps any economy grow. The converse of that is to look at Zimbabwe and see what happens in the economic. You can damage the very people you are trying to empower through this process. Land audits demonstrate that the state is still a big owner of land. Traditional leadership is still a big owner of land. You then further discover that in the expansion of private property rights in RDP houses, etc., land ownership is still in that space something that is not a guarantee. Why is it? I'll give you two policy positions. The ANC says the person must live in a house for so many years. The DA says, when we give you a house, we'll give you title immediately, because then you can do with it what you want. And then I think, furthermore, when it comes to land reform programs, they are not limited by compensation. That's what the high-level panel report by President Motlanthe says. It says actually it's about corruption, it's about dealing with corruption, allocating funding, and ensuring that there's efficiency. So, for example, now the ANC spends more money on VIP security than it does on land reform. And what I'm saying is that we certainly can't reverse history and go back to conquest and not conquest. What we can do is where we say, here's a South African who needs land in this community. Let us be able to transfer the land properly to that individually, and the cost component of the issue. Either we deal with it with an allocated budget, or we can test it within the Constitution to ensure that the equitable compensation is in place. The law is not our problem. It's the competence of the issue. And the future, Bratim. For me, the thing that we must talk about the most, and that's why I say that our economic problems don't just begin and end at the land conversation. Sure. They transverse to other areas. Our future must be where citizens can prosper in their rights, create work for future generations.
Well, let's take another question here.
Good evening, Mmusi. It's Batando Malingo from Midrand. Jacob Zuma announced free education following the Fees Must Fall protests. I just want to find out, what is your position on free education, and what are your plans to make sure that an average black person is able to study further?
It's an important subject. I think that the announcement by the former president certainly is unsustainable. Our view is that if you are poor, the state should pay, and if you are wealthy, you should pay. That's the basic formulation. So, and we believe that we must increase access. We mustn't say to ourselves that the only option that young people have is just to go to university, but if they so choose to do so, we must be able to ensure that young people can. We have universities that are set up for sciences, certain sciences, and we have other universities that are set up for skills and vocational training, so that when we get at the end of it, we're preparing young people for the world of work. So for us, if you're poor, the state will pay, but if you're wealthy, you must pay.
All right, I want to go back to that idea you mentioned earlier on of early childhood development, right?
Correct.
I'm not sure. How much are we spending at this time? You said it's 72% of children who do not have access to that?
At 78% of our kids at grade 4 can't comprehend what they read. In the first 1,000 years of a child's life in South Africa, 1 in 4 die every day. This constitutes a crisis, mainly because of malnutrition. So the multiple options that we've got is to say, when it comes to even Child Protection Week, let's go out of our way to say, let's have an expensive rollout of early childhood development centers in South Africa. That's a start. The second issue is that let's increase the money we give to people who are mothers of children. Because if we can increase that, we can ensure that there's this level of food security. Because if our children are not eating by the time they get to school, it's immaterial. We put the best teacher, the best technology, they are not going to survive that thing. And so we've got to increase how we feed our kids at that level. And then furthermore, let's ensure that when it comes to primary and basic education, we address the discrepancies where teachers don't turn up because they're protected by unions or principals are simply captured. Let's ensure that we've got accountability at primary school level. We can then begin to turn the prospects of those kids going into high school.
Mmusi Maimane is the leader of the DA, and we will be talking to him in a short while as we get to the final stretch of our conversation. Please keep those tweets coming in at #ModiseNetwork.